Good evening, I'm David Nicholas, and next here on CMU Public Television, Senator Mike Green joins me on this week's Capitol Report.
Welcome to Capitol Report, a weekly discussion with your elected officials on the issues and concerns that affect you.
And thanks again for being with us as we welcome back to our program State Senator Mike Green. He is a Republican from Mayville in his current first term for the 31st District. Senator, welcome back. Good to see you again.
Thank you, David. Nice to be back.
As we sit down on a Friday morning, it was yesterday that the Senate adopted the rules aimed to reduce the sale of stolen metal and car parts. What are the particular points of what this legislation will do to curb what was identified as a statewide problem?
Okay, let me just touch a little bit on the problem. Has been over a number of years, folks stealing scrap things that could be turned into scrap, but actually they were car parts that off normal cars, catalytic converters being one. Folks would steal catalytic converters and get a pretty good price for it at the junkyard. And I guess this is a good thing if the car's not any good anymore. But when they steal the catalytic converters off the normal cars, it has a big effect on the people. And so for a number of years, they've been trying to figure out how to solve the fact that the scrap iron dealers pay for it. And actually, they're stolen, but they don't know it. And other parts, copper too. Detroit had a big problem with many of their vacant houses and sometimes even businesses where folks would go in and strip them of copper and take it to the junkyards.
Saw a lot of that back home in my hometown of Flint too. The area's hard hit with the downturn economy and the connection there. Yeah,
my son bought a new house in Millington, fairly new house, and while he was going through the paperwork, he caught two guys there one day in the basement stealing his copper pipe, his water pipe. And so, I mean, it's everywhere. And they've been trying to get a handle on it for a long time. I'm not sure that this was the solution that everyone was looking for, but it was kind of a balance between what the scrap iron dealers wanted and what the police folks wanted.
We see it as the problem in the cities, but also out in the rural areas. And as I was reading that, where it's been sort of at a higher, I don't know how you would necessarily get at what's in between the cities and the rural, but being identified as a rural problem as well. Yours is a more rural district. Why are we looking at the economic factors and people more out of work turning to this as a source of income? Why an increase potentially or a persistent problem in the rural areas as opposed to some of the urban areas that we've seen?
People are people, and there are different types of people that feel like they need money and try to get money other than working for it. And they're thieves, and that's just as prevalent in the rural areas as it is in the city areas. And I think these two guys that got caught stealing my son's copper, they're just thieves. And they had a long list of B&Es, breaking and entering, and they had broken into this one. They got caught. Now my son, evidently they got a judgment against him, but my son now every 2 or 3 months gets a check for $30, $40 restitution because they got caught and he testified against them. And but that's small scale. The big scale's in the bigger cities, and a lot of people feel like this is a solution. I'm not sure that it is. There's a lot of cash that goes on with the scrap dealers and the public, so I mean, it's a solution. It's a problem with a tough solution, and they think that they've got some type of a solution. Now, we voted on it yesterday. It's going to the governor. I think it's probably a pretty good solution, but everybody always finds ways to get around these things.
Is it an attempt, though, to put more regulation on the way that the business is done, more of written documentation that maybe gets at serial numbers identified, things of that sort, so that when things are reported, it's easier then to track back through the process of potentially where the sale took place, where that transaction happened, and then getting back to a name for the potential perpetrator?
The police, the attorney general, who've been working on these problems for a long time, have come up with the idea that when somebody brings you this, you can't give them cash, you can't write them a check, you have to mail them a check. And then once the check is cashed, they got record of who it was and their name and address and all of that. Now, they'll probably put that in a file and try to track the people down that's doing it. Again, people always get around laws that we pass, and I don't think it's the end solution. It's just really, really difficult to teach crooks to be good.
Out in the more rural areas, of course, a lot of farmers too as well. What has been the reaction so far from the farmers in your district to the recently passed Farm Bill? And we'll get to the tie-in with the Michigan Farm Bureau recently in D.C., but the overall with the Farm Bureau, what has been that reaction so far since that was passed?
Well, the Farm Bill for years has been trying to get away from paying people not to farm, and they've finally done it with this bill. They will pay farmers for conservation practices, which I think is a good thing, because if the government wants you to do a particular practice on your farm that you don't normally do, well, it's the government's idea, so they ought to at least pay you for doing that. And they're beginning to do that now. It's the same thing I've said with wetlands. If the government's going to say, well, you've got 40 acres of wetland, you can't touch any of it, well, gee, that just takes everything away from an individual's right. So now at least government is beginning to look at paying people for things they want protected. And the same thing in the Farm Bill. So we're going to pay you to do conservation practices. There were some other things. There were support prices for dairy and for sugar beet growers, and things that they'd been looking for a long time. And I can't tell you all the details on those, but at least the dairy farmers and the sugar beet growers seem to be very satisfied with it.
Now, there are two major conferences that we often track with folks that we talk to at the Michigan Farm Bureau when they gather in Lansing to sort of set the way they want to go, their direction for policy, and then following up after their trip to D.C. Now, especially on the heels of the passage of a new 5-year Farm Bill. Any reaction? You did note as we sat down that you were at a Farm Bureau meeting this morning. Did they give any initial reaction to how things went with their sit-down in Washington?
They did say they were generally satisfied. There was a legislative director for Representative from Flint,
Congressman
Kildee, and he gave an update of everything that was in the Farm Bill. Of course, most of the farmers there already knew, and some of us knew some other things, but everybody seemed satisfied. Farmers don't get real excited about a lot of things, but they all seem more than satisfied that at least the bill's done now, and they can know what to expect and what they can do and what they can't do.
Does this have a direct impact on, as you, the lawmakers here, go about the process through the course of this year, setting policy or passing allocation for funding for agriculture and so forth? Is there anything in that Farm Bill that has a direct tie-in to, or sort of that federal over the top of state aspect of how you might be shaping policy or funding and so forth?
Yeah, I don't believe it would have anything to do with the way we shape policy, but there could be some money, and if there is, I've not heard of it, that will come to the Department of Ag for different projects. But I couldn't speak specifically on those things, but there could be some money that comes to the state to oversee some of the programs that they're doing. But generally, they do it through the Rural Development Department in offices in Lansing.
Along with the trend we noted earlier when it comes to scrapping and that theft, we constantly hear about the growing trend, continuing trend of identity theft. You have in the planning stages an identity theft seminar coming up in early April. What can you tell us about that, who you hope to attract, and some of the things you hope to accomplish with that?
I can't give you a whole lot of details on that. The Attorney General's doing most of it. I'm facilitating it, and I'll do some introductions of the folks. But generally, the Attorney General and his office, I don't think he'll be there specifically him, But I've actually got meetings scheduled in most of my counties, at least Bay County, Lapeer County. At least there'll be access to most of my constituents to come to it, and they're going to talk a little bit about identity theft and how to keep from getting it, losing it.
This week, Governor Snyder was calling on the legislature, House and Senate, for a bill that would regulate and tax e-cigarettes. Your position on that when it comes to public health and potentially, since tax is involved there, what it would mean potentially for revenue for the state?
I'm not sure where the governor's going on that. I can tell you one thing we just did. We made it illegal to sell e-cigarettes to minors. And I think that was a pretty commonsensical thing to do, but it had never been done. So the governor kind of runs his own agenda until we get things drafted into bills and things like that. We really don't understand the details of where he's going with things. And sometimes he announces programs he likes without any details. So that kind of makes us sit back and, let's just wait until we see something. He does have a lot of good ideas and good thoughts, but again, some of the things we can welcome generally, but we can't say, I'm absolutely going to support that, because you got to wait and see the details.
Have there been any discussions or people that say anything to you when it comes to e-cigarettes? Do they feel that even for the sales to adults that it should be taxed as a regular tobacco product has been?
Nobody has ever came to me and talked about e-cigarettes for anything. Even, and I'm in my office every day down there with people coming in. I'll have 4 or 5 groups a day come in and speak to me. No one has ever came to me and talked about e-cigarettes. To tax them, to use them, nothing. The only reason I know anything about that particular issue is because we just passed a legislation that stops minors from getting them.
Post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, is now going to be added to the conditions allowed for treatment with medical marijuana. Anything else that you're being told about through Department of Community Health and other offices as conditions that could be under consideration to be added to that list?
Yeah, medical marijuana is a tough issue, even for those that want to use it. There really are very few regulations to control it or to allow it. And so ever since the people have passed that, everybody in Lansing has been scurrying to find out really how to set up rules. Policemen will say, we'll stop a guy from speeding, we'll stop him. He's clearly under marijuana, and there's a bag of it sitting next to him in the other, right next to him in the car, and we can't do anything about it. So I think you're going to see a number of regulations rolling out, probably not through the legislature, although there will be some, but trying to get a handle. And again, the Attorney General has been really diligent about trying to get some rules passed for that, but with a lot of difficulty too. We just don't know there's not a lot of leeway in the law, and there's not enough to pass regulations, and there's not a lot of leeway to pass laws, to change it, to regulate it. And so you've probably heard a lot of talk about medical marijuana, but it's been really difficult to pass any regulations on it.
Because it was a badly written proposal.
Yeah, it was.
I've never had anybody sit where you are now, or anybody that we've talked to, that said it was well-written to begin with. And I'll pose this question to you because we did so last week with Senator Boer as well. Issues that come up that a grassroots group here or there want to see go before. Sometimes we know that the process is that they will come to, or there will be groups trying to put some amount of influence on you as lawmakers saying, let's get a bill, let's do something. And sometimes it goes through that process, and other times for whatever sets of circumstances, and you can divulge those or not when it comes to medical marijuana. This didn't go through that process. Grassroots group takes it straight to a ballot proposal, very loosely worded, and since then, we have had the mess that has resulted in court challenge after court challenge and everything that you're describing, trying to figure out how to manage what this sort of loosey-goosey thing was that was put on the table. So still in the fact that we are faced with that open-ended and poorly written policy, you know, the law enforcement folks, I guess, are probably still in your ear. What are they saying about this, and what's the best way to define it, to get a handle on managing what we have?
Well, number one, it's in our Constitution. So in order to change the Constitution, it'd take another ballot proposal. And now we could offer a ballot proposal with 2/3 vote of the House and the Senate, but I don't see any interest of doing that. And trying to get a handle on what we can do constitutional-wise is another problem. I know the Attorney General has been working, I mean, that's one of his big projects, to try to control marijuana and the effects that it has on people. And it's a big debate. The House just passed a bill the other day to allow, basically, it doesn't say that particularly, but when it comes down to it, brownie-laced marijuana, some paste marijuana that can help a few folks, but it can be put in suckers for kids. Everyone's nervous about where are we going? Are we going to make a sucker with marijuana in it and let our cranky kids with colic suck on it to calm them down a little bit? Nobody really has a handle on any of it. And I think we've got to be careful as we pass laws that we do the right thing. And I think that's why it's taken so long.
Minnesota's been moving in the direction of taking it up as for medicinal use. We've seen what's happened in Colorado and other states. Anybody that knocks on your door, rings your phone, or feels either in support of or in concern that there are going to be calls to move towards a full legalization.
I've not heard a word about it. Nobody's called me. Nobody's knocked on my door. I have not heard the legislature talk about it. I think Michigan's different than Colorado. But if someone gathers signatures and put it on the ballot, who would know what would happen? We're finding more and more people that are looking at it and saying, I mean, they passed the medical marijuana, and so could they pass it? I think probably the votes would be there to do it.
Hearings were also set to open this week that would lift the cap on electricity companies in the competition for their customers. It was noted that Representative Mike Shirkey, in support of this, said that the limits would, quote, stifle utilities competition and in turn economic growth. How much can you help us understand the present framework of how that cap works when it comes to utility competition and what changes there could be as this is proposed?
It was a royal battle in '08 to get it passed to begin with. But basically what it does, it says Consumers Power, Detroit Edison, has a 90% total market. They're based here, their plants are here, and so they feel like in order for them to be able to keep up with the demand for electricity, they have to keep building and they have to keep producing electricity. If they opened it up, and now we have a 10% open for folks to go on any electricity and get it cheaper out of state. If we open that up, then that's going to cause problems with Edison and consumers, and it's going to, they're certainly going to be against it. They certainly like some folks call it monopoly. You can call it whatever you want, but I guess maybe it's not exactly a monopoly. But the fact is, do we want to keep our companies here producing electricity, or do we want to depend on California for our electricity? I mean, I think that's what the legislation is going to wind down on. Then there's also legislation that you didn't mention about charging just a little extra money every month for those that get natural gas. And therefore, it would go into a fund to pay for infrastructure for consumers and the gas companies to get natural gas to more of Michigan's constituents, which I think would be very helpful. Everyone's trying to get on natural gas. Propane's high. You can see what happened to propane this winter. I think folks are wanting to move away from propane to natural gas.
Does that get us directly, though, into the debate over fracking?
We've always been fracking. We've been fracking for 50 years. I don't know if you've debated that on your show or not, but we're producing.
But for those that are against or those that want to see more of, because the groups that have been as stridently as they have been anti-coal have pointed to wind, have pointed to solar, but then there is the other option, which is natural gas, which is not going to do what coal does, but at least, and this is where the debate continues to go as to whether or not it causes any extent or level of environmental impact, as they say, comes with with the coal plants.
Natural gas is a good source of energy, and we're seeing consumers is building a new natural gas electricity plant in Genesee County. It meets the federal guidelines for emissions, and I have no idea how much they're spending on it, but they're spending a lot on it. I think natural gas, in fact, I saw, this may not be true, but I saw an article some time ago that General Motors was going to come out with a vehicle burning natural gas. And to me, that makes a lot of sense. I don't know where the filling stations would be, though. And that's where all the work is, building these other types of energy things, batteries. Where do you plug the battery in? So moving to different types of energy, it isn't just retrofitting the car or the truck. You got to retrofit everything else, too. But getting back to electricity and gas, I really believe that let's not get into that fracking debate. Because there's people on all sides of that. But the fact is, we have an overabundance of natural gas in Michigan today, and we have access to it. We have a lot of access without new fracking. And I think it's going to be, at some point, someday, we're going to have a whole lot more stuff running on natural gas than we do today, and I think it's a good thing.
What about then, somewhat related, or at least an offshoot when we talk about energy, the debate over the renewable portfolio standards and whether or not we should be 10% by this year, or 15% by that year, or 25 by 2025. Where do you see that debate going?
Well, I'm not sure, but the governor has put out some reports, and again, there's legislation introduced. None of it gets taken up. It's not going anywhere until we get a consensus from the House and the Senate and the governor on what type of a package we want for our new energy. You're probably not going to see anything, but I think you're going to see it maybe next term. The governor has given, and again, he has to propose it, and then we will debate it, and we'll see where it goes. But there's speculation that the governor is going to have a proposal probably next year once the elections are over, and if he gets reelected and we have the two majorities again, I think that issue will be taken up.
Recently, there was an announcement about things tied to some projects through the Natural Resources Trust Fund, somewhat in that related area, the ongoing concern for need for funding when it comes to dredging on the waterways. And you said as we sat down, there was some possible movement or development when it comes to the Caucalan River. What can you tell us about that?
Well, I've been working with a group of folks that lives on the Caucalan River, but also a bunch of farmers belong to that too. And the Caucalan River has not been dredged, the upper limits of it, some of them, ever. And the Caucalan River drains about parts of 4 different counties. So it's important. There's a lot of ag land being drained from it, and there is a lot of flooding up there too. And so for the last few years, there's been a group put together to try to look at that and get some dredging done of the river. Part of the river's okay, the mouth's bad, and the upper reaches up around the Euclid Avenue Bridge definitely needs some cleaning out. And then all the tributaries that are north of that and west of that really need some work too. And so there's been some work going on towards it. They've asked me to help them raise some money to get that work done. I was able to get 1.7 million through some different funds. And that's a beginning. It's not a cheap project whenever you dredge anything. But we've got enough money now to at least dredge the mouth of it, and that's the beginning. And so we'll just have to work our way all the way up it. There's a lot of work being done north of the main line with Soil Conservation District, putting in filter strips to keep it from keeping the stuff from going back in to the river to fill it back up again, and that's an important part of stopping what's causing it to begin with. But we're looking for some federal money that we can match with the state money that I've got to hopefully go a long ways to clean that out, and I believe that's an important thing for Bay County.
No way to know what that total, I mean, you said expensive project, but this would at least be the start moving along.
Yeah, they're talking about maybe $4 million, but when you start adding all the tributaries up before it actually gets to the river, there's no limit probably of what you could spend.
Okay. Very briefly, in less really than a minute that we have, I did want to at least find out the status. Last month you introduced legislation regarding Michigan's concealed pistol license, or the CPL. At least where that bill stands. We'll probably have to talk about it on another occasion, but where that stands moving forward at this point.
Okay, we discussed at one time Senate Bill 59 that I'd introduced that would eliminate gun-free zones, which some people feel are add to the problems, because if you keep honest guns out of some areas, the crooks still carry the guns there. So there was an effort by a number of us, and I put together Senate Bill 59, introduced it, that would eliminate the gun-free zones, and then would also make major changes to the gun boards. And when the governor vetoed Senate Bill 59, in his veto message, he explained why he did not want to eliminate the gun-free zones, but he also said he's willing to look at the process. So Michigan's process, since the bill was originally passed in the year 2000, which turned Michigan into a shall issue. If a person goes through certain steps and he clears background checks and he clears anything else, then he shall be issued the concealed carry permit. And so he said the process he'd be more than willing to look at. He wanted the process to be in one area instead of bringing all kinds of different parts of the county into a gun board. And Michigan's the only state in the nation left with a gun board. All the other states has one place where you go.
Noting those changes then, is the bill then presently before committee? Have we seen a Senate vote? Where do we stand?
Okay, so
right
I introduced a bill just to change the process. It's in committee. We just redid a draft of an amendment, and it had one hearing. It's going to have another hearing Tuesday. I think we're going to vote it out Tuesday, and the governor has been pretty open to signing that if we can get it through the legislature.
Okay, well, we'll watch the progress on that and the other measures that we talked to and things that we, as usual, have had to leave on the table. But thanks, as always, for your time, and we do appreciate you coming to talk with us again.
Nice talking with you, Dave. Thank you.
And thanks again, as always, for your time and attention. We've been talking with State Senator Mike Green from Mayville in the 31st District. Program repeated again tonight in our overnight lineup here on CMU Public Television. Soon then, too, posted to our website at WCMU.org. Click on TV and WCMU Productions to get to the link for our Capitol Report page. For our director, Chris Ogazali, and all of our crew, I'm David Nicholas. Thanks for your time, and have a good week.
You've been watching Capitol Report. Join us again as your elected officials speak to your concerns on current issues.